The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
It's coming.
All these voices. All these voices. All these things you can't explain. All these painful memories. They keep haunting you and daunting me. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a ghost of you and me. Of you and me. All these whispers.
My name is James Hershey. Right back.
All these shadows in my mind. My reflection I can't find. It's just a ghost of you and me. It's just a smoking gasoline. It's just a
That ought
ghost
to do
of
it.
you and me. Of you and me. Don't let 'em take you away. Don't let 'em bring you down inside. It's just the mirrors in your mind. Don't let 'em bring you down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Staring into the Abyss. I am your host, horror author James Hershey Jr., and with me, as always, my co-host, Old Boy James Ash. How you doing, brother?
Pretty good. How's everybody doing tonight?
Tonight's show is going to be a little bit different because it's a show that I am responding to requests that I've had from a lot of my readers, and it's going to be on serial killers, but it's going to be a look inside the mind of serial killers. I have a unique affinity for this because I am able in my novels to really capture the essence of the serial killer. In my trilogy, the Legion trilogy, which is I Am Legion, The Surrogate of Souls, and The Rise of the Revenant, in those novels, I was able to perfectly illustrate what a serial killer is and how they think and how they act. So well, in fact, that my first novel, I Am Legion, was actually on a required reading list for a criminology course because of how well it portrayed serial killers. I haven't really gone to school for this, but I feel that the reason why I am able to capture the essence of a serial killer so well in my novels is because of the way I do my novels. Some of you may have heard about my process before. For those that haven't, I'll explain it real briefly. Ever since I was a child, I've been having horrific nightmares every single night. And my nightmares are actually where my novels come from. I take my nightmares and I put them on the page, and that's the novels that you guys buy from me. In my nightmares, I am there. I am in the story. Everything is super real to me. I can smell the blood, I can hear the screams, I can feel the sweat dripping off me as I watch these things unfold. It is way more real than any dream that you could imagine. It's almost like reality for me. My nightmares are also so vivid and so detail orientated that I really feel like I know these characters. I feel like they're real living, breathing people, and they act and react the way that real living, breathing people are supposed to act and react. I've had these dreams ever since I was a child, like I said, and it's every night of my life. I will get a different scene from the story every single night, and I will continue to get a different scene every night until the story is finished, and then they will begin repeating themselves. That's how I know when the story is done. And once I actually write the story out in my notebooks, then it moves on to a different set of dreams. Okay, so that's the basic overview of how my process works. to how I create the novels that I create. I feel that this gives me a unique perspective on serial killers because I'm really able to explain how these killers are, at least the ones in my novels, because I've kind of in a way lived through the horror of their crimes because I was there for it. I was in the room when they cut people apart. I was in the room when the women would be screaming, or when people took their last breath. I was there to watch it. You may say, well, that's just a dream. How does that relate to actual serial killers? That's silly. But it must in some way correlate because, like I said, my first novel, I Am Legion, was put on a required reading list for a criminology course because the professor thought that it so perfectly illustrated how serial killers think that it was one of the best things that his students could read to learn about serial killers, so that when they went out into the real world and did their jobs, that they would know what to look for. On tonight's show, what I would like to do is take a journey inside the mind of a serial killer. Really see what makes them tick. See the things that the profilers actually look for when they're trying to find a serial killer. Some of the common attributes that the overwhelming majority of these people share. Whether you're talking about Manson, whether you're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, whether you're talking about Ted Bundy, the Son of Sam, Menendez, whoever it is, they kind of share a lot of the same traits. Now, not every single one of these behaviors is going to apply 100% of the time to every single serial killer. Only a fool would believe that it would. But it happens in enough cases to where the professionals who profile these people and help law enforcement to find them, they have kind of compiled a list of the things to look for when you're looking for a serial killer. So if, let's say there's a series of murders that takes place in your city, the police believe that it's the same person that's doing these murders because they have some of the same calling cards there. You know what I mean? Like they were killed in a specific way, or the killer cut off the left ear in every single murder, or just something that links them all together, that makes the law enforcement people, the homicide detectives, believe that they're not just dealing with crimes of passion, they're not just dealing with normal murder, they're dealing with a serial killer. Now, murder has been around since recorded history, basically, since our earliest days. Ever since Cain spilled his brother's blood, murder has been around. In that particular case, that was a crime of passion. He was upset, acted out of rage. The overwhelming majority of murders that take place in at least our country, but pretty much the world as well, are just that. They're crimes of passion. You get overwhelmed, you get upset, you act out without thinking, and next thing you know, something horrible has happened to somebody. That's a lot different than a serial killer. A serial killer is somebody who murders multiple people over an extended period of time. Now you have mass murderers. They murder a multitude of people at the same time. There's a difference. Usually a serial killer, when he kills, it's most of the time going to be a single person over and over and over again, instead of killing multiple people once. Some of the traits they all share, one is they like to manipulate people. Serial killers are usually very manipulative people. Some of them are extremely charismatic, and they're just people that you just are drawn to and that you just love right away. Others aren't so charismatic, but they use their shyness or their weakness against their victims. Jeffrey Dahmer was a great example of this. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't this charming personality like somebody like a Ted Bundy or a Charles Manson was. Those two guys could charm your pants off. They could get you to do just about anything because they just had this natural, raw charisma that you just couldn't compete with. Jeffrey Dahmer was different. Jeffrey Dahmer was very shy, very withdrawn, very meek. But he used that to his advantage, to disarm his opponents, or his victims, I should say, not opponents, and to give them a sense of ease to where they could trust him. You know, they could view him as not being a threat. and it enabled them to let their guard down around him, and that's what he took advantage of to kill them. People like a Ted Bundy or a Charles Manson, they would use their charm and their personalities to draw people in. So those are the two sides of that coin. But in each of those two cases, you have the same basic principle, which is manipulation. The manipulation is not just to get their victims to do what they want, to make it easier to kill them. The manipulation runs a lot deeper. In a way, it's a form of power. It's a form of control for the serial killer. And that's going to be a common thread that runs through a lot of these different personality traits. It's kind of at the core of what these people are. They have a need to control the situation, to control the world around them, and to control all the people in the world around them. And when you really get down to it, the act of murder is ultimately the greatest form of control, because you are exercising control over someone's life, and you have the power to end it, which is much of a greater form of control than simply a small manipulation. But that's where that comes from, I believe. That's where all of the desires that the serial killer has, it all boils down to control. So manipulation is one thing they look for. Another thing that profiles will look for is people that like to self-mutilate. Now this comes in many, many different forms. You have the obvious form, which is physical self-mutilation, like cutting is a great example of that. Some people like to hit themselves, beat themselves. They will scar themselves. Others have liked to burn themselves. These are all forms of self-mutilation that we would all be familiar with and that we would recognize immediately as self-mutilating behavior. There wouldn't be any question in our minds. We'd say, oh yeah, they're self-mutilating. That's obvious. Not every serial killer does this, but the overwhelming majority of serial killers do this in some way or another. On top of the physical self-mutilation, you also have an emotional, a mental, and a spiritual self-mutilation as well. Now this could be something as simple as being down on yourself, of telling yourself that you're no good, that you're a piece of garbage. It could also manifest itself in ways such as thinking that you are going to be judged by God, that God hates you and that you're destined to go to hell because of your behavior. A lot of people misrepresent this as feeling sorry for themselves. It runs much deeper than that. It's not necessarily feeling sorry for yourself. It's more of a way of self-mutilation, to down yourself, to harm your spiritual self, the part of you that really is you. Because in the end, our bodies are really nothing more than a vessel. I mean, we walk around in meat suits our entire lives, but this hunk of meat that we live in is not us. We are a spiritual being. The real person that we are lies inside of us. It's our mind, it's our spirit, it's our soul, so to speak. That's who we really are. And the physical manifestation of ourself, our bodies, really don't mean anything. They're temporary, where our soul is eternal. A lot of times the self-mutilating behaviors, especially the physical, is a way to punish themselves, their physical selves, for the crimes and the misdeeds of their spiritual self. So the self-mutilating behavior can come in multiple forms. So when you hear that, don't just think in your mind of cutting or beating or scarring or burning or in some way harming your physical body. It can be many, many different things. Another thing that pretty much every serial killer has in common, and this one is very, very prevalent. This happens in almost every single case. The person will have an unusual IQ. Now, when I say unusual, I don't mean unusually high, necessarily. Now, in some cases, the people that are serial killers are brilliant. I mean, they're absolutely geniuses. Very high IQs. That is common. But on the flip side of that, some of them have extremely low IQs as well. You know, if you look at somebody like the Son of Sam or Ed Gein, neither one of those guys were rocket scientists, but their IQs were actually below the average level. So when I say unusual, I mean either unusually high or unusually low. Most people that have average IQs, that are normal, average, everyday people, are never going to be serial killers. There's something that goes wrong inside the brain. Something isn't functioning the way it's supposed to function for you to be able to commit crimes like this, for you to be able to take another person's life, not just once, but again and again and again, and in truly horrifying ways. An average normal person is not going to be capable of that. I think that really says a lot about why it has to be abnormally high or abnormally low IQ, because there's something different in those brains. Something isn't working the same way. And like I said, you find that in almost every single case, to where you have a difference from the average. Another thing that profilers will always look for is antisocial behavior. In a lot of cases, it's extreme antisocial behavior. Now, this usually does not manifest itself plainly and on the outside. Most of the times, a serial killer on the surface will be nondescript. They will be somebody that just kind of blends in, and that you don't ever think that they're capable of the crimes that they're committing. You always hear, every time there's one of these cases where you have multiple murders by a person, you always hear the exact same thing from the people that knew them the best. You always hear, but he was so nice. He was such a kind, loving, polite person. I never would have thought that he'd be capable of something like this. That is the standard thing that you will hear from friends and family every single time. You never hear, when they're doing one of these interviews with these people, you never hear one of them say, "Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. That guy was crazy. I knew he was going to do something like this someday." You never hear that. Now, you'll hear that about mass murderers. You'll hear that about people that murder somebody in an act of passion or rage. You hear that all the time. But serial killers are a different breed. They are cold and calculating, and they really plan out the murders. There's a lot of thought that goes into this. Going back on the last point, the most successful serial killers are the ones that have the extremely high IQs. They are the ones that plan out their murders much better than anybody else. And usually, they will get away with the murders for a long time. These are the people that carry on year after year after year and don't get caught. And then eventually, whether it's luck or whether it's the fact that they slipped up and did something wrong, eventually they will get caught. There's a few times when they never did get caught, and they just, kept on killing, and then they died or something, and then we never solved the cases. But most times they will get caught eventually. Now, the people with the very low IQs, they're the people that go out and they rack up a body count of 4 or 5 or 6, something like that, and then they get arrested and it's over. The high IQ people, they're racking up the double digits. They're racking up 20, 30, 40, 50 kills before they're eventually caught, sometimes even more. But the antisocial behavior, one is exhibited obviously in the act of killing. That's an obvious manifestation of the antisocial behavior. But what I'm talking about is usually when you notice the severe and extreme antisocial behavior, it is when these people are young. Because when you're a child, you don't have the presence of mind to think that you need to hide this behavior. And a lot of times you don't have the ability to hide the behavior either. You are ruled more by your emotions when you're younger. You have all the hormones rushing to your body, adrenaline as a man, especially once you hit puberty. And you don't have that ability to govern yourself as well and to put on an act for all of society. Usually when you're a child, what you see is what you get. So if you have a bad egg, if you have an evil seed, you're going to know it when they're a kid. You know, we all knew those kids growing up who would be really cruel to other people just because they seemed to enjoy it. They enjoyed making you cry. They enjoyed hurting people. They were the kids that would be sitting in the playground pulling the wings off of flies or breaking apart worms, stuff like that. So that behavior that I'm speaking of usually manifests itself when they're young. Once they become adults, they learn how to mask that behavior, and they put on that costume, so to speak, okay? So it's an act that they're putting on, and it's almost too perfect because, like I said, you always hear from everybody, I never thought that guy would have done that. He was a perfect guy. I can't believe it. That's because they are putting on an act for everybody to draw suspicion away from themselves, because they don't want everybody to know the monster that they really are. Another very common thread in the overwhelming majority of serial killers is that they had a horrible life growing up. Okay, either there was severe trauma and just a very, very bad situation of sexual abuse or physical abuse, emotional abuse, some kind of abuse that was very severe and really messed them up. That's a very common thread. Even in some of the cases where it appears that the serial killer had a perfectly normal childhood, a lot of times when you dig into it, you will find that there was something that took place in their life that really messed them up. You know, something way out of the ordinary that was very bad that happened to them that caused them to act this way. Now, you do have a very small percentage of people that are just born bad. They are born differently than us. They don't function the same way. You know, we call these people sociopaths. They have not only no empathy, but they're not even capable of empathy or any real kind of emotions. You know, they don't feel love. They don't feel sorrow. They don't feel guilty. They don't really feel much of anything. They just don't have that capability. Now, in those cases, those people very well could have had a perfect upbringing, a perfect family life. They could have had no traumatic things happen to them in their life to cause them to become the way they became. So in the case of sociopaths, that's a different situation than a normal serial killer. Now, I would say most likely there's a much larger percentage of serial killers that are sociopaths than the percentage of sociopaths in the regular population. Because I think they're definitely suited for that line of work. They're definitely made to be monsters because they lack the ability to feel guilty for what they're doing. So when you don't have guilt, you don't have any kind of internal governor holding you back. You don't have any kind of angel and devil on the shoulder that tell you right from wrong. It just doesn't matter to you. I think they have a much larger propensity to become monsters and become serial killers than normal people do. But that being said, the overwhelming majority of serial killers and murderers in general have something in their past that have caused that kind of behavior. Another thing they all share is they have trouble holding down a job. They have trouble fitting in to society in a normal way. That's because they don't think the way we think. They're just different. They have so much going on inside of them, so many demons that they're battling, so much inner turmoil and struggle that they're going through, that it's hard to focus on something as mundane as a 9-to-5 job where you go into the office and you sit in your cubicle and you type on your keyboard. They're just not those kind of people. You're not going to find that. In almost every single case, what you have is you have people that kind of bounce from job to job to job. They have long periods of unemployment where they're not working. They're just not able to properly function. Some of the sociopaths, they will hold down jobs because they're not dealing with the same kind of struggle and torture inside themselves that a more of a psychotic kind of serial killer would be dealing with. They're able to live a relatively normal life other than the fact that they don't really have emotions and they enjoy killing. But outwardly they appear to be normal. Whereas the more psychotic serial killers are the people that there are warning signs there. You know what I mean? They're not going to be the normal 9-to-5 guy. Another common trait is the propensity to brag about everything that they do. They have, in almost every case, illusions of grandeur. They believe that they are here for a special purpose. They believe that they are so much better, or that they are chosen for some purpose. That takes place in just about every single serial killer case there is. Every single one of them, whether you're looking at somebody like a Charles Manson, who is telling his followers that he is basically Jesus come back to earth, or whether you're looking at somebody like a Ted Bundy, who believed that he was God's gift to women and men and everything. He believed he was just the greatest thing on earth. In almost all these cases, you have people that they blow things up a lot more than they are in their lives. If they have one tiny little victory, they will turn it into a gigantic windfall of success in their minds. And when they talk to people about what's going on, they blow things up really large to where they're the greatest thing you ever seen. That's called illusions of grandeur, and that is a trait that almost every serial killer shares. The next thing that profiles look for, and that a lot of serial killers have in common, especially in their younger years, as they're becoming men and they are learning to cope with this desire that they have and all these strange and terrible emotions that they're feeling, is that they compulsively masturbate. The act of masturbation is not necessarily a sexual thing. And I know that sounds crazy because in essence it's a sexual act that they're performing. But it's more of a feeling of release from all the pent-up desire that they have. They really want to be killing and murdering and hurting, but instead they're just trying to look for some kind of release valve for that pressure that is building inside them. So a lot of times you will find that these guys will compulsively masturbate. I mean, they do it an unbelievable amount of times a day. That's not because they're nymphomaniacs. That's not because they just have huge libidos. It's because they're looking for that release valve. They're trying to have that emotional release that will lessen the building pressure before an explosion takes place in their life. Going hand in hand with that, the majority of serial killers are also peeping toms. This can range anywhere from your average run-of-the-mill ordinary peeping tom, where you're hiding in the bushes or in a tree and you're watching some woman through her window get undressed. That is what we are all familiar with when somebody says peeping tom. That is the image that comes to mind. But it goes much further than that. Serial killers don't just pick a victim at random most times. Now you have some that do, like the Son of Sam was a perfect example of somebody who just randomly chose a victim. He would actually go out driving around looking for a victim, and when he found somebody who looked good to him, that he thought, yeah, this is good, there's nobody around, I can kill this person, he would pull up, get out of his car, walk up and shoot him, and then get back in the car and leave. He didn't stalk his prey for a long period of time. He is the exception to the rule. The overwhelming majority of serial killers will actually spend weeks, sometimes longer, stalking their prey before they actually strike and kill them. There is that bit of voyeurism that is involved in that process. The same as with being a peeping tom. There's a certain excitement in the chase. They enjoy finding their victims. They enjoy watching their victims. Sometimes they will even break into their victims' homes multiple times and wear their clothing or sleep in their beds. Things like that, just to feel closer to the victim. Charles Manson used to do what he would call creepy crawlies, where he would break into someone's house while they were sleeping, and he would just go all over the house really quietly and go up beside the bed while they were sleeping and just stand there and watch them sleep and then turn around and leave. There is a feeling of power that comes from that. There is a certain gratification that they receive from the chase, from the hunt. Now, the act of being a peeping Tom in the standard sense might lead up to that later on in their lives. The stalk is a natural extension of the original peeping Tom behavior. Going along with the whole voyeurism thing and the stalking thing, they also have very vivid fantasies. Now, this can be, and usually is in most cases, fantasies of how they're going to murder their victims, the things that they will do to them. Once again, it goes far beyond that, because this can stretch all the way from victim-centric fantasies, where they're fantasizing about the actual murder taking place, to reliving the murder for a long time after they did it, to going back in their mind and replaying it over and over again and reliving that experience until it loses its luster, and then they have to go kill again to get a new experience that they can concentrate on. That also fits into this category. Another thing that would fit into this category is something that also goes along with the whole illusions of grandeur thing, and that is fantasies about the reasons why they commit the crimes they commit. Whether it's God telling them to do it, or whether it's their dead mother speaking to them and telling them to kill, or like, for example, in the case of the Son of Sam again, he believed that the neighbor's dog would tell him to go out and kill people through its barking. So where me and you would hear the dog barking all night, he would hear the dog telling him to go murder people and kill people. And it drove him crazy to the point to where he felt he had to go kill, otherwise the dog would never be quiet. This is also a vivid fantasy. So it comes in many different forms. You also have fantasies that the serial killer actually believes that through the act of murdering his victim, that he is accomplishing some grand goal, that he is in some way bettering the world or bettering the universe, or that he is in fact setting that person free and enabling them to truly be happy. These would also fall under the category of vivid fantasies. Another thing that they almost always have in common is they will struggle with substance abuse. This can come as alcoholism. It's usually where it starts. It almost always graduates from alcohol to the softer drugs and into the harder drugs. This is a common thread, but it's not in every case. There are some that don't do drugs at all. But people like a Ted Bundy, he started out drinking and he went on to much harder drugs. Jeffrey Dahmer also drank a great deal. This is something that profiles will look for, because it's kind of a sign of some kind of internal struggle going on. These people are fighting these demons. They're dealing with these pressures that are building up inside them, and they're trying to come to terms with the horrifying desires that they feel inside themselves. They turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to deal with that, as a way to try to numb the pain and to quiet the voices that they hear inside them. Another thing that happens in almost every single case is when these people are children, they start off by torturing animals. It usually starts with very small animals like insects. I mentioned earlier about like pulling the wings off of flies or cutting apart worms, pulling the legs off of grasshoppers, crushing roaches or stink bugs, those kind of things. That's where it starts. They enjoy that control. It boils down to control again. Through torturing animals is a way to exercise that control over something that's weaker than them, that they can't fight back. Something that they can easily hurt and control, that can't stop them from doing it. It graduates from insects to small animals like squirrels and bunnies and birds, and then it works its way up to dogs and cats, and eventually gets to people. What usually happens is when they start out small, it seems to quiet those desires for a while, and then they feel they have to do it again. And then eventually what happens is it loses the power. It just doesn't do it for them anymore. So they have to graduate from bugs to smaller animals. And then that'll be fine for a while. But then eventually that won't do it for them anymore either. So they have to graduate to larger animals. And then eventually to human beings for the same reasons, because it doesn't have the same excitement level. It doesn't have the same power that it had before. So then they make their way to human beings, and it just kind of keeps going, until it has to be more often and more often and more often. And that's usually when they get caught. Because when serial killers start off, it's usually once a year or once every couple years. There's a lot of time in between the murders. But as time goes on, they find that they need that fixed more and more often. So the spacing in between victims begins to shrink. It goes from every couple years to every year to every 6 months to every month to every week, until finally they're out daily looking for people to kill. It gets to a point where just enough is never enough. They can't get enough, so they have to keep going more and more often. And that's usually when they reach a level of franticness and panic to where they slip up and make a mistake. And then once they make a mistake, they leave behind some clue to who they are. Whether it be fingerprints or whether it be DNA, clothing, or they're seen by somebody because they're not planned out well enough and they're acting in haste. Something happens to where they make a mistake, and that's what ultimately leads them to get caught. Another thing that a lot of serial killers have in common is that they like to start fires. It's not only the act of destruction that a fire brings, but once again, this is a control issue. But with starting fires, it's more evenly balanced between control and a sense of power. Pyromaniacs love fire. They love the way it looks. They love the way it smells. They love everything about it. They love how fire can enter a structure that appears strong and formidable. Because a house is a formidable thing. It withstands storms. It can keep you safe from the elements. It can keep you safe from people. By locking your doors tight, people can't get in to get you usually. So a house is a symbol of power. It's a symbol of security and safety. So the act of burning it down is not only to enjoy watching the destruction, but it's also tearing apart that sense of security and safety in the world. That's a big part of it. I think that's the fascination that most serial killers have with fire, is because it's a beautiful thing. When you stare at a flame is very beautiful. But even though it's beautiful, it has the power to destroy your entire world. Anybody who's been in a forest fire or a house fire knows just how quickly fire can destroy. That ability to destroy so quickly and so savagely, combined with the ability to not only destroy the physical, but to destroy the metaphysical, which is your sense of security, your sense of safety, your feelings that all is right with the world. A fire can take all that away from you. That is the ultimate control. That is the ultimate form of control. And that really draws serial killers in. That really intrigues them, because that is what drives them. There's a lot of parallels between fire and serial killers. In a way, they're a lot alike, because both have the power to end your life. The goal of each is to destroy everything around them. A fire feeds on living things. A serial killer feeds on living things as well. And I don't just mean in the cannibalistic sense, like Jeffrey Dahmer, or like in fiction with Hannibal Lecter. I also mean in a spiritual sense. They feed on your fear. They feed on your helplessness. They feed on taking away the normalcy in your life, and taking away that sense that you have that you're safe and that you're going to have a great life, that everything's wonderful. They take that away from you. Spiritually, they feed on that. So I think that is why serial killers are drawn to fire. Now, that's not saying that every serial killer is a pyromaniac that goes out and burns down, houses and big buildings and that kind of thing, because they don't. But in almost every case, when you actually interview these people and you talk to them, they all have that fascination with fire. And I think on a subconscious level, the reasons that I stated are really what drives that. Because they see fire as more than just fire. It's the ultimate manifestation of what they want to be. The destroyer. The one that can destroy your whole world. When you really boil it down, there is no greater sense of control or sense of power that you can have than that. Those are some of the things that the professional profilers that do this for a living and that help the police to find these people who are committing the murders, that's some of the things that they look at in order to red flag somebody as a potential serial killer.
And thank you, brother. I really enjoyed this episode that you gave about In the Mind of a Serial Killer. Here's my opinion on this. Well, like you were saying it, you think some of these people are not just are coming from bad homes or they had something bad happening to them. That happens sometimes, but most of the time, some of these people just like to do this. There is some people who have gone through a lot of stuff and had bad things happen to them, and Charles Manson didn't always have the greatest life, and a couple other of these murderers, but some of them weren't bad people. Jeffrey Dahmer kind of was like not a horrible life, but he kind of like was on his own, like a loner. And, you wouldn't even know that guy was a killer. I mean, it's kind of weird, but you wouldn't know he was a killer or anything unless, and then you find out everything he did, eating people and making people into sex dolls and the craziest things he did. You would never think that. And the thing that's crazy about him is he actually did really, I think, regret doing what he did. He was just really sick. And he had a disease, and he didn't get help for it. And he got his in the end. He was murdered in jail, beaten to death. But I think he really sincerely regretted what he did because he let people yell at him. And when he was getting convicted, he let the families go off on him. And most people didn't do that. And I think, like I said, he was just a sick person. Now you have Robert Ramirez, as I think he just liked to kill people. And Ted Bundy and the Zodiac Killer, I think he was a little nuts. But I think these people actually like to hurt people. And there's a movie called, I think it was 6mm with Nicolas Cage, or 8mm, I'm sorry, with Nicolas Cage. And at the end, there was the killer. He wore like this weird mask, but he said I didn't grow up in a bad life. I didn't have people doing bad things to me or beating me or molesting me. He goes, I just like to hurt people. And I think there's some people who have something wrong in their head that like to do bad things to people. And they either fantasize it or they dream about it. It's the same thing, basically. And that's what starts off killing like animals and birds. That starts it off. And then they go up to dogs, then beating people up, and then it goes to killing people altogether because they want to see how it feels to kill somebody. Because it's like a power trip, like James was saying. It's about power. And these people like to have power on people. And that's a power statement, that you could do something to somebody and they can't do anything back because they're either drugged or tied up, so they can't defend themselves. It's too late. And they do their weird experiments or weird how they want to kill them and rape them and whatever they did. And that's because it's a power thing. They get off on hurting people. or having control of that situation, or they have some sick, twisted thing they like to do. Like Albert Fish, he liked to kill children. He also was into dominatrix with men. He was a really weird man. And he also used to put nails in his pelvic bone and needles and stuff like that and jab himself so he could feel pain because he liked to feel pain. That's a thing that some of them do. They like to hurt themselves in the genital area and their body so they can feel pain for whatever, for pleasure, basically. Some people like it. I don't want to get too graphic because, you know, we're on the radio, but that's why they do it. Don't get it. Nobody, they didn't just go out because they were beaten up or tortured and molested. Some of that does happen, but that helps a little bit. But don't get this messed up. Majority of people like power, and that's what they get off on, with power. And that's how they do it. They kill people, or they torture them and then kill them, or do all kinds of unspeakable things, or eat them like Jeffrey Dahmer, or Ed Gein. He wanted to be he hate his mom, and then he was making a woman's body. He was out there too, but you wouldn't even know it. They said he was a normal, he did his own thing, and then they come to find out he was making purses out of women's faces and making a whole bodysuit of a woman to be one. And that's where they got, Silence of the Lambs and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They even made the Ed Gein movie. These guys are out there. They had a lot of, like Charles Manson. See, I don't know why he was more of a manipulator and a liar, and he was also deranged and sadistic, but he never got proven he killed anybody. He had people kill for him. So he's a little different than all these other ones. All these other ones were just wanted to kill somebody, they did it. And they did it in some bad ways. And I feel sorry for their victims. Like, especially Jeffrey Dahmer's victims and Ted Bundy's victims. Actually, all the victims, poor people. A lot of, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez. It was another one. All these women were killed. Jack the Ripper. He was another one. He killed prostitutes in England. I think that was another one. I think he had a problem with women. I could say that. Something happened to him. So I could say that he definitely had some issues with women. But here's a paranormal one I'm going to get to. There's some people think these guys were possessed by something. Richard Ramirez might have been. He was a Satanist. So that's a possibility on a couple of these, that something got into them to go crazy like this. I think that might be a possibility on one or two of these. You also want to always throw that in. They could have got possessed by something, like a demon or something, that made them go over the edge, and they got possessed. This is just a theory on a couple of them. I'm not saying all of them, but a couple of them, it sounds like that might have been, especially with Albert Fish, because he liked to hurt himself, and that's a sign that something was in him, because they like to hurt humans. They like to feel the pain of a human, because I think they feed off of it. And that's a theory I have about that. It's something new that James wasn't talking about. I think some of these guys, a couple of them, were possessed by something. Some people are, you're crazy, whatever. No, well, then whatever you want to believe, that's your opinion. Like I said, this is my opinion. And I believe a few of them had something other than, they're out of their mind. To eat somebody, there has to be something there. It wasn't like some of these people ate their victims, and there's got to be something there, because some people do go insane, but these people didn't really do anything to these. There wasn't no revenge thing. It wasn't like Cain and Abel. Cain, he was talking about that earlier, since time this has been going on. Cain killed his brother over jealousy, but these people, some of these killers just kill people, and some of it just doesn't even make sense, and it never will. And I don't understand that. So there's where I think some of this stuff, some of these people were possessed, like the Amityville house horror. The real story, like the brother got possessed by the devil or a demon, and went around and killed his whole family. he claims that his sister helped him, and there's possibility his sister did, and she turned on her and killed her, but that's what ended up he killing his whole family. So that's a possibility with a couple of these. Some of them, I just think they were just deranged. They just had no emotions. They had no feelings to humans at all. And to do some of the stuff they did, I don't know. That's really despicable. Because some people, they did, like the Iceman, he was a killer for the Mafia. He killed people because the Mafia hits or they deserved it because they were bad people. But then after a while, he started just killing people just to see how to kill somebody. So he started getting deranged too. So I just think that some people have it in them, and I think they're born with this gene where they just don't see how we see. Unless you do something really bad to somebody, you do something like that, but it's a power thing. I think that like they have this weird thing that they're just better than everybody in some weird way. And I don't know how you could explain that. That's something that they're sadistic. They think they see people different than we do. They see people as like stock, like cows, and they can just be butchered and no one cares. And they can do whatever they want. And that's not how life is. That's why we have a lot of problems now with a lot of murders and stuff. People just don't get it. And they think it's all right just to murder people and do whatever they want, and there's no consequences. And these people all pretty much paid, except Jack the Ripper. They could never really prove who he was. So that one's, sometimes people get away. Not everybody gets caught. And some, like Charles Manson, he rotted till he died in jail. But again, he wasn't really a murderer. He had people kill for him. So I don't know if you could really, that's why I never understood that one. But I mean, because of who he was, and he was very, like James says, he was one of these guys that could sell you a coat in the summertime because he just knew how to manipulate people. And he could do it. And he was pretty good at it too. Pretty much to get that many people to do things for him that most people wouldn't do. But I just think that you're a very deranged person, and to murder people that way, you think they're like cattle. And a lot of these murderers, like a lot of people like them, and they have a cult following, especially Charles Manson. I mean, like I said, Marilyn Manson, I used his last name for, the singer. And they made Helter Skelter, the book, and then there's movies about Charles Manson and other killers, like Ed Gein. Like, people like that guy, and like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs. Like, these guys are glorified. People start wearing their shirts and stuff, and they don't really realize what they're doing. These weren't nice guys, and they did some really awful things to people, but I guess there's some people like that. They got a thing for serial killers, seeing people die. I mean, that's the horror, like that's why a lot of people like horror movies. That's a thing that people have. It's like an aggression in humans. They like to see stuff like that, like the Gladiator days when you would see them fight to the death. So I guess that's just something in humans, but not the way they did people. This is a select few could do some of the stuff that they do and get away with, and I don't get it. But I think it's more of a sickness, and it's also not just that, it's also a power trip, or it could be a paranormal thing. It could be a demon, like I was saying earlier. I wouldn't be surprised about that. That happens sometimes. And I think this might be, a couple of these cases might be that issue. But in the mind of a madman, a killer, I think that they think way different. Like, I think at a different level than most people do, but I really think they think in a different world than we do. They see people as cattle and not regular people. Like, that's why we have a lot of issues, because some people just think they're better than others and they can do whatever they want and get away with it, and there's no consequences. Or it's just they just got a power, it's a sex power thing, and it's just, that's why some of these guys rape their victims or kill them. And I think it's more of a power thing, a control more than anything. And that's all I'm going to say about that. I want to give everybody a shout out for listening to our show on Parax, Staring in the Abyss. I love you guys. You guys listen to us every week. We're getting bigger and bigger all over the world. I want to thank you guys. I love you. if you guys want to watch or listen to our other shows on YouTube, go to James Hershey's YouTube page and subscribe. You can listen to all our old episodes. They're really awesome. A lot of stuff. You guys like Bigfoot, ghosts, some aliens, paranormal, vampires, anything you really your paranormal needs will be fulfilled if you listen to our show. Trust me. And if you guys would like to sponsor us or advertise, you can check out our Patreon page. And James Hershey in a minute will tell you where to go and what to check out. But just remember, guys, I love you. And I hope you guys all have a good weekend. I want to give a shout out to all our fans. I love you guys. Thank you for following us. My beautiful girlfriend, my lovely daughter, James Hershey. I love you guys. Have a good night. Misfits, Sugar Ladies, and Monster Hunters. I love you. Good night.
The links are youtube.com/James Hershey Jr. The Patreon link is patreon.com/James Hershey Jr. Please subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you want to support the show, you can pledge there at the Patreon page. You can also do advertising there for our show. And just thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you for all the support. It's really cool that we have listeners all over the world that listen to this show. And this episode is a direct result of a lot of the people that read my novels that have asked me to do this episode, because they really enjoy the way I portray serial killers in my books, and they wanted this episode from me. So this is a hat tip to my readers, this episode is. We will be doing an episode coming up in a couple weeks that will be a direct result of a ton of our listeners asking me a particular question. And I'm not going to say what it is yet, but you'll see in a couple weeks. I'll let you know on the episode. I have had a lot of people ask me for this episode, so I'll be doing that one in a couple weeks. Me and Old Boy will. Thank you guys so much. We love you. And until we speak to you again, love many, trust few, and do harm to none. We love you. Bye-bye.